Last week's Radio KD8TTE introduced the basic message format, the 16 line. We're going to take a look at two examples that came in from participants in a recent exercise, the example that I gave in the first place, and also some ideas about how to create those messages from a template or with applications we already know. Stick around. Black. We've talked a lot about messaging and about formal procedures for ensuring that exactly the communication that needs to take place can take place, and that the system of moving those messages is viable. So we introduced the 16-line radiogram, the basic message format that is used in government circuits. We need to understand that, especially if we find ourselves interoperating with government stations, for example, on 5 megahertz with shares stations. I gave an example of a message that came up when there was a power outage that happened because of severe weather in Ohio. I sent a message out on the Black Swan net. I gave some instructions, and this provided a very nice example of how we can use the 16 line. We use these a lot on the Black Swan net. Now, if we go through this, we're going to be able to see row by row exactly what elements of the format I'm using, and we're going to be able to use that as something that we can refer back to if we want to see what one of these messages should look like. We have a communication exercise that just started up over this past weekend. A few stations that were warming up for that exercise, ionized particles, sent me some messages in the 16-line format just by typing them in straight, freehand, if you will, without use of a template or without use of an application. Let's take a look and see how they did on a line-by-line basis. So our first attempt comes from station AA1AAA, and it looks good. As it's coming in, we're able to see that it is going to start with DE. It's the indicator of the station that this message has come from. And whoops, we notice that the very next line, that is another row, is introduced before we get to the message number. The format calls for the this is and also for the message number to be on the same line. So we're going to correct that. Now we have a row that has all of that information together. Moving on to our example for the second row, we can see there is a preamble, and that's going to include a message precedence, a date time group, as well as message instructions. Now, we have not included the detail about message instructions to date. We're going to do that at a future time, but this should just whet your appetite a little bit about what's coming. So let's take a look at that first message that has come in, and we'll take a look at that row that has the preamble. First thing we notice is that we have precedence set. That is P, that's priority. That looks sane to me. Now we move on to the date time group. The date time group, well, doesn't look quite the same as mine. Let's break this down and see what's actually happening. The date time group format is defined in ACP 121, paragraph 346. It is always in the format of 6 figures for the date and time, followed by time zone indicators, 1 space, 3 initials for the month, and then possibly a space and then a year. So our example that we want to look at here, at the time that I drafted this slide, we have 081317 Zulu. So our first 2 digits, it's the day of the month. 08 is the 8th day of the month. We move on to the next 2 digits, and this is the number of hours since the start of the day. That is 13 hours since the start of the day. We move on to the next 2 digits, and we see how many minutes we are into the hour. 17 minutes into the hour. We have now our time zone indicator. Z is UTC plus 0. That's Greenwich Mean Time. We have some other options, of course. J is going to mean local time. There is no defined time zone J, so J can be used for local. Q, Quebec. That's going to be now plus 4 hours equals GMT. So that's going to be Eastern Daylight Time. Eastern Standard Time is offset by 5 hours. So now plus 5 hours, that's Romeo time. Sometimes we see L in amateur messages. L is a time zone as defined in ACP 121. It's just to the west of Alaska. Do not use L in this format. It does not mean local. If you are using that, then you are very, very far east, Russia, or maybe you are in one of the islands that's just south of there. Next up is our month, the abbreviation with 3 initials. Following that is the year. If there is no year defined, it obviously means it's this year. There could also be the 4-digit version of the year or a 2-digit version of the year. So if we take a look at the incoming message again, we can see we've just got the wrong number of digits. We don't actually know what the time group is. We've got a leading 0 even though we are missing a digit, so it's not a leading 0 problem. So is it a problem where we're missing a leading 0 for the hour? Are we missing the final digit that's supposed to indicate minutes? There's no way for us to know. We also have a space then before the time zone indicator. We then have a month that is in the correct format, and then we also have the year, which is correct. So we can tighten this up by looking at what time the message actually came in and see if we can fix it up here. So based on the time that I got the message, it was 9:41 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on the 6th of August. 9:41 p.m. converted to the 24-hour clock is going to be 21:41, and that time zone is Quebec. Quebec is now plus 4 hours to convert to Zulu time. 21:41 plus 4 hours is going to bring us to 25:41. 25:41 in something that can hold nothing more than 2400 means that we've got 1 hour and 41 minutes that we need to carry over into the next day. As a consequence, 9:41 p.m. on the 6th of August is 01:41 on the 7th of August, Zulu time. They are exactly the same time. It's just a question of where the clock is. Thus, our date time group becomes 07:01:41 Zulu, August 2022. Moving on, it looks like the rest of the structure is good. Oh, we see there is a typo here. Information is misspelled. Of course, when we're doing this, typos are going to happen. The reminder to double check our work is important, of course, when we are doing this work on behalf of others. We then see the completed message as corrected. Message is good. It includes information about where the station is able to get information by radio, and it's clear, showing us where the weather radio station can be found. We're going to be able to get surface weather observations from a nearby airport. We know specifically which airport, we know the frequency, and then we also have FM and AM broadcast stations, amateur radio repeaters locally, and then, of course, Citizens Band Radio, where information is able to be collected. So that's the corrected and completed message. Good job. Moving on to our second incoming message. This one's a little bit more complicated, a little bit larger. First thing we take a look at is our message number. We see that shows the station that it's coming from. The message number is there. It has the # NR, and then it has a figure immediately thereafter. Interestingly, the # NR for number is actually optional in this format. There are examples in ACP 124 where this is defined that show both a space and no space between the # for number and the message number itself. I prefer to be explicit, so I put the # NR in place, and I also like to put a space between that and the message number. As it's written, it's not wrong, so I'm not going to make any changes here. Moving on to our preamble, it is correct. We have a routine precedence message. We can see that our date time group is in the correct format. This happens to be the version that uses the 2 digits for the year. This date time group, as it's read, is the 5th day, 15 hours and 41 minutes Greenwich Mean Time on the 5th of August. And so that turns into the 5th of August, 11:41 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Moving on to our address sections, we see that we have all of this is consistent with the instructions for the exercise. There's a good use of spaces to show a fold. That is, in our to addressee, the action addressee, we have this put onto two separate rows with via KD8TTE visually being below the NN05HA cowpens. By putting the spaces before via, we can see clearly this is a continuation, so that's a good use of the space there. We also have two information addressees. They are KX4Z and KD8TTE. Again, by having the pro sign that goes with them, we can see what it is. We don't confuse it with an action addressee, and we also don't confuse it with a sign that is made up of multiple groups. By repeating the pro sign in front of KX4Z and KD8TTE, we know that we have separate information addressees. Good job. Moving on to our group count, we see 69 groups indicated, so let's take a look at where those groups are going to come from and make sure that we have the right number. So when we take a look at the number of groups, that's going to be in the text part of the message. That's line 12. That shows up between the separator at line 11 and the other separator at line 13. So we take a look in the message, find our separators to get to line 12, and we've got a problem. Instead of two separators, we actually have three. So it looks to me like this might be an example of where some informal voice procedure has been interpreted and then introduced into a formal written message. Sometimes when talking on a repeater in particular, amateur stations will speak for a while, but the repeater is going to allow for a transmission of only up to 2 or 3 minutes. In order to prevent the repeater from timing out, which is to say dropping that station's transmission, the operator will let go of push to talk. When working FM repeaters, it's unusual to say over or out because there's often a courtesy tone that makes it clear when you've dropped carrier. As a consequence, to prevent other stations from keying up after you if you haven't finished your transmission, sometimes the operator will say break, let go of push to talk, and that means that they're going to continue as soon as the repeater has reset. What I'm thinking is that the operator here, in creating this message, had the concept of I'm going to have a break in thought, or I'm going to continue on after I put something in here like a subject. So we just have an extra separator, and that is actually messing up the written format of the message. So we're going to get rid of the superfluous break there, and now we have a clean line 12, and we're able to count our groups. Now when I count up the groups, I see 44, so I'm going to correct the group count. Again, groups are going to be groups in the text line of the message. It's not everything. In fact, 69 is the number of groups if you look at the entire transmission, including pro signs. So that's not what we want to capture. We mean to count the number of groups in the text part of the message. So now we have the corrected message from AA2BBB. It looks good, and as we look at the content, it raises another question, and that is whether the recipient is going to understand it. As I was taking a look at this, I can see ionized particles, weather report. I understand what this is. And now I see PRI, Alachua County. Okay, alt, FEMA, cont. Is that continuation? I don't know. And then there's E's on the next line. I didn't understand immediately what that was, but then I noticed that those lines put together, the very first letter spells out PACE. We've talked about PACE plans on this channel. Primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. It's 4 layers of being able to get something done, whether it's a weapon system or a communication system. The PACE plan is going to give you the ability to do the job as you would like, as you normally would. It gives you an alternative, but it also gives you the ability to fall back to other things in the event that the primary and the alternate aren't working for you. So I can see from here what's going on. We understand that we want these messages to be short. They're going to take time to transmit. They're going to be terse. We understand that. However, if we make them so terse that they cannot be understood, or we're using some kind of an abbreviation that the recipient, the addressee, does not understand, then it is a false economy. We are now introducing some confusion, or somebody's going to have to ask a question to clarify. So instead of saving time, we have actually now wasted time, and instead of saving transmissions on the air, we are now making extra transmissions on the air. Better to have a couple of extra letters to be clear about what's going on, or to introduce what's coming with some kind of a leading word or two. For example, if it said pace plan and then spelled it out like this, that would also be clear. So this is a good example of a 16-line message. It looks good. So in both of these cases, there were some small issues to deal with, and they were correctable, but they did introduce problems for being able to process the messages. So the question arises, how can we avoid having that problem? Well, we've got a couple of options. One of which is we can use the FL Message application. That is something that is available to us. It's available for just about any computer platform you can imagine, and it does a great job for what it's supposed to do. In addition to providing things like the amateur radiogram format, as we have shown on this channel, we also have the ability to use a form that is from the Mars collection, and the Mars Army message is going to be a 16-line. We can use FL Message to start up a new message, go to the Mars Army format, go to what it calls the body, and that's going to be the text of the message. We're going to type whatever goes in there, whatever it is that the agency needs for us to do. We'll capture the message. Once we have that message captured, and it is the way that is going to be feasible for us to send and also gives the information that the agency means to send, we can move over to the header tab and now introduce the addressing information. So we might use something like a tactical call sign or some other indicator, the signal operating instructions that we're using or whatever instructions we have will tell us the way that those things should appear. We can put in the originator, the from sign, the action addressee, and there's also an info addressee. We also have room for a subject that we can put in there. We can set the precedence. The date time group will be automatically populated by one of those buttons. This is right now. We also, if we have configured FL Message with our call sign, we hit the ME button, me. It's going to put our call sign in there, and then we can just put in the message number. In many cases, FL Message is expecting that you're going to save this in a specific format that is used for transmission. In the Black Swan Net, we work with interoperability, so we don't necessarily know for sure that somebody's going to be able to read those FL wrap sort of messages. So what we want to do is to use that and to view plain text. Now what we're looking at is a plain old 16-line. We can save that 16-line and we can put it into the folder that we use for transmitting our messages. There is, of course, another option still, and that is we could just use a template that we have created. If we use a plain old template, we can just fire that up and then save the text just as if we were typing it all in with FL Message. So again, this is not a message format that you're going to see commonly on amateur circuits. Most amateur nets are not even aware of this format. If you notice, however, you'll see that it does seem to have some elements that are pretty common with bulletins coming from the ARRL, for example. And that's all right. It doesn't really matter if there is going to be something in one format or another, as long as two things happen. The first thing is the format needs to be appropriate for the task at hand. The second thing is the format has to be understood. The whole point of having formats is to make it so that people can readily work with what's coming in. We can even make it so that it's so standard that software can do the work for us. And so that's why it's important for us to understand various formats, and this happens to be the basic message format, the 16-line. We're going to continue to use this throughout the next month or so. The ionized particles exercise is going to be on the Black Swan Net. If you are not within range or able to work on 5 megahertz during the day or able to reach us on 80 meters in the evening, then you are still welcome to participate. If you would like to coordinate some interaction between your group and ours, we could set up some special links between your nets and ours on the frequencies that are appropriate for the time of day that we're working. We can also work by relay, such as through WinLink. We're happy to work with you, and I hope that you find this very helpful. Like the video, share it with others if you found it to be helpful, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything coming up, and until next time, this is Radio KD8TTE,